Let's go. The Too Deep NFL podcast back at it here as we talk some NFL draft. Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, Eric Eager from Super Sports. I'm Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB. We will break down the NFL draft. One of the best in the business, Bucky Brooks, does it for NFL.com, NFL Network. Where is the depth in this draft? Where do the quarterbacks fall? Are we going to see any high risers, any big droppers? We break down the NFL draft from all angles. We do it right now here on the Too Deep NFL podcast.
You're listening to the Too Deep Podcast, the most complete analysis of the National Football League, breaking down the NFL like no one else can. Too Deep is hosted by Jeff Chadiha, Eric Eager, and Soren Petro. Jeff Chadiha is a senior columnist and on-air personality for the NFL Network and NFL.com. Eric Eager is the vice president of research and development for Sumer Sports. Soren Petro is the afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Too Deep is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here are the hosts of the Too Deep Football Podcast, Jeff Chadiha, Eric Eager, and Soren Petro.
All right, thank you very much, Curtis. Guys, a lot to get to here tonight. I know you were at the Combine not long ago, breaking it all down, scuttlebutt, news, information. Time to break it down with a guy who does a fantastic job when it comes to the mock draft, when it comes to ranking each one of the positions. Jeff, one of your colleagues, would you like to do the honors?
I will. Very happy to have Bucky Brooks join us, tremendous draft analyst. We used to play basketball together. We lived in Oakland, California back in the day. And also a former Kansas City Chief. Yeah, I think he spent a year or two with the Chiefs, right?
Yeah, I did. I had an opportunity to play a little Marty ball, like 97, 98 with the Kansas City Chiefs. So that was a lot of fun. And you're right. Jeff playing basketball in Club One, fond memories back in the day.
Right. Way back.
Who got the better of it?
We played together.
Oh, yeah, we played together. We were always on a team. Come on. It was fun. A lot of fun.
Well, we mentioned the Combine was a week or so ago. We got all the measurements, got all the, all the details, had the big 40 times, had everything that's going on. What stands out for you overall? I know you've been breaking this down for a while, going back even before the season was over. What stands out to you about this draft class overall, Bucky?
The class in general, I think is one that has plenty of talent in certain areas. Normally the marquee positions don't always provide you with the kind of depth and talent, but this year we have plenty of passers, we have plenty of pass protectors, we have some intriguing pass rushers, and then we got some playmakers, meaning pass catchers on the perimeter. And so for team builders, I think they're excited because where the draft is deep is where most teams are kind of looking for cornerstones to build their team.
Yeah, Bucky, I know we can't talk about the draft without first starting with the quarterbacks. And I know Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jayden Daniels didn't work out. JJ McCarthy, the other guys, Michael Penix, Bo Nix did. Let's start with Caleb Williams because he's the big question here. The Bears have the top pick. There's a lot of talk about them trading Justin Fields. How much do you trust Caleb Williams to come in and be a star player in this league?
Well, I mean, look, the last 2 years, all we've heard about is how Caleb Williams is Pat Mahomes-ish in terms of the way that he plays, the way that he makes things happen off the cuff. He's an improvisational playmaker, and he specializes in kind of playing out of structure. The thing about his game is when he's on, man, he's a fantastic prospect. You see him make off-platform throws. You see him kind of whiz it all over the yard, doing some things that you obviously have seen Pat Mahomes do. I wouldn't put that tag on him, though, because I think that's such a lofty expectation to compare him to a guy that's going to be a gold jacket player. But I think at his best, he's very reminiscent of what Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson have been when they're playing at their best. I think he does his best work when he's not kind of operating in a timing, rhythm kind of aspect. He makes things happen when the pocket breaks down. He's able to run around and use his athleticism and his arm to create big plays. That said, the National Football League is about being able to play in rhythm. And so he has to really exhibit enough discipline to play in rhythm when the offense is structured like that. And I think the challenge will be, can he play in rhythm for an offensive coordinator that wants to build a game plan that's not just about the quarterback running around and making these improv splash plays, but more a disciplined, coordinated effort to move the ball down the field.
Yeah, and Bucky, when you see, because Caleb Williams obviously has been the one that's been talked about for a number of years, as you said, but now you have both pick 2 and 3 are teams in New England and Washington who also need quarterbacks. A lot of talk, initially in the markets, it was Drake May was the favorite to be that second pick. And, Jayden Daniels, who, in my estimation, I think at least statistically for LSU last year, had the best season of any one of these players in the whole class from a production standpoint. Do you think, what's the distinction between those two guys? Because I think a lot of people are talking about them as kind of equals, whereas I think that their styles are a little bit different. Like, can you expound upon kind of what separates those two? And is it truly one of those where it just depends upon the team that's picking at 2 and 3, who will get second and third in those two slots?
The funny thing is, and I may be a little counterculture, I think you can make the argument that all three of these guys are kind of lumped together. I think there's been a debate for so long that Caleb Williams is way up at the top and then everybody falls below. I think when you talk to some evaluators in the business, like, they may love Caleb Williams, but they also think both guys bring interesting attributes to the table. And Jayden Daniels, he is exactly what you talked about. He outplayed both of his competitors last year. He was the best player in college football. Obviously, he resulted in the Heisman Trophy, but you just don't see dual threat quarterbacks who have A+ running ability and A+ passing ability. He's unique in that regard. 55 games of experience at LSU, 12,000, well, not at LSU and Arizona State, 12,000 pass yards, 3,000 rush yards. The only person to ever do that in college football history. And so there's a lot to love about his game. The issue that you'll probably have for most guys is he's really thin. You don't see quarterbacks that are built like that. And coming off a year in which you saw Bryce Young, not necessarily get beat up, but it's an outlier when it comes to body type and physical dimensions compared to what the prototype is. Are you comfortable having that kind of quarterback in your offense versus Drake May is the prototype? The last 50 years in the National Football League, the quarterback that has played the position looks like Drake May. Physically in stature, the way that he carries himself, the way that he throws it. He's athletic enough to do special things. He's high IQ, great family, all the intangibles. The issue that he had is he didn't have a great final season. If you go back to his sophomore season, he was terrific. I mean, 4,000 yards, 35 touchdowns, 600 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns. He had all of those things. The problem is, are you willing to bank on the projection or do you want to go with the production? Because if it's the projection, everyone is going to line up for Drake May. But if it's the production, Jayden Daniels then kind of wins the argument and becomes the guy that goes to the top of the board.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up because it's so funny. There are quarterbacks in the history of the league, like, we cover the Chiefs here, and Patrick Mahomes, when you look at his college career, is a steady increase, right? He just got better every year, and then he became who he was. But that hasn't always been the case. Like, all the way down to, like, Dan Marino at Pitt threw more interceptions and touchdowns his senior year and fell in the draft. Justin Herbert was drafted below Tua and Burrow. Burrow, another guy who just got better year after year. But then there are other guys like Josh Allen had a much worse final year at Wyoming than he had second year. Jordan Love, who's probably going to be a $50 million quarterback now, was much better as a sophomore at Utah State than he was as a junior before he came out. I think that that's what makes the quarterback position, and even Brock Purdy, who obviously started a Super Bowl, many of you can argue he was a better early career player at Iowa State than he was as a finisher there. Because at the very top of the draft, you're drafting for potential. And so in some ways you want to grab at that second to last year of Drake May. But to your point, you're also wanting these guys to improve, because if a guy doesn't get better after he comes into the league, then you give him that $50 million paycheck after that rookie deal, and you're sort of stuck as a franchise, as a lot of these teams are. So how do you balance that? How do you balance the traits, the very clear flash, but the decline in college versus the guy that like Jayden Daniels, who just kept getting better?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very difficult situation, but I think what you brought up is something that if you're a decision maker, if you're going to go for a quarterback, you kind of want to swing for the fences, right? Because it doesn't matter if you go and get a quarterback that is just a B-level quarterback in 4 or 5 years, you're looking to replace him, or you're going to be stuck with paying him. Now it's going to go to $60 million for a quarterback that you know can get you over the top. I think what you have to do is when you're looking at these college quarterbacks, you have to envision that, okay, this quarterback that I'm taking, he is going to have to beat the likes of Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, for us to be able to win. Trevor Lawrence, whatever you throw out there, he has to be good enough that if we're in a shootout, is he good enough to win? And so when you do it that way, it then becomes an examination of, well, what are his superpowers? What are the things that separate him from others? So in Jayden Daniels, I can say, hey, man, he might be the best dual threat quarterback prospect that we've ever seen. He's a better thrower than Lamar Jackson was coming out, and he's giving you comparable rushing yards. Is that enough to take you over the top? And Drake May, it's kind of the combination of stuff that you talk about Justin Herbert being able to deliver when he was coming out of Oregon. People worried about Herbert's production coming out of Oregon, but Mario Cristobal told me we couldn't run him because he didn't have a backup. If he gets hurt, like our hopes are down the drain. So I can't run him until the Rose Bowl and the Pac-12 championship game, which is when you finally saw him unlock it. I think a lot of it depends on style of offense and what you're comfortable. But if you're talking about what is traditionally played and played well in the league, Drake May's physical dimensions are that. But the only thing that kind of throws a monkey wrench in that argument, experience matters. If you go back to the Bill Parcells rules where they talk about the number of starts, that then leads you to the Brock Purdy thing. Brock Purdy having 49 collegiate starts at Iowa State. Well, Jayden Daniels had 55. Michael Penix and Bo Nix and those other guys are well over 50. So it's just, how do you balance all that? I think it's a very subjective deal, and you have to be very convicted. And hey, if we take this guy, we have a plan for how he's going to play and how he's going to play well for us.
We're talking to Bucky Brooks from the NFL Network, breaking down the NFL draft. We are proudly brought to you by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete, nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor. Parking lot problems, they're not a problem. They've been making them disappear since 1994. Leave a great first and last impression with any customer, any client. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, online at GannAsphaltConcrete.com, GannAsphalt.com, excuse me. Bucky, where does, in your mind, JJ McCarthy fit into this mix? Is he a guy, I know on your 2.0 mock, you had him 12 to the Broncos, but do you see, somebody moving in to get up and get him? Is there, it only takes one team to fall in love. Are there some teams that you think are going to value him up there with that group of three that most people think are a step ahead?
I think it's more likely that he's in their group of three than he's not. I think the conversation coming out of the combine, there are a lot of people that are really impressed with JJ McCarthy. JJ McCarthy has a few things that are going for him. One, he is quote unquote winner guy. At a time when all these 5-star quarterbacks are going to places where they can throw it all over the yard, he intentionally went to Michigan to be a guy that could win in an offense that was a run-first offense. So it speaks a lot about his willingness to sacrifice, his willingness to kind of put the team over his individual agenda. A lot of people will find that appealing. He also would get a rousing endorsement for Jim Harbaugh. You've heard Harbaugh talk about him being QB1. We can say a lot of things about Jim Harbaugh, but every quarterback that he's touched has turned to goal, pretty much, when we think about it at the NFL level. So people are really going to value that. His athleticism, his arm talent, like the way that he's able to throw it, even though he had limited opportunities at Michigan, you can see a lot of the potential there. Now, I would liken him to Alex Smith and how Alex Smith was when he got with Andy Reid and played for the Kansas City Chiefs at a Pro Bowl level. Maybe he leaves you wanting a little bit, but man, they won a lot of games in Kansas City with Alex Smith at the helm. I think JJ McCarthy kind of offers that kind of potential to a team that's considering him as a QB1.
So how do you build a plan for him? Because I feel like he's such a young guy. I mean, he just turned 21 years old. And like you said, he hasn't been in the same kind of situations as far as carrying a team with these other guys. Like, how would you craft a plan for him to be successful in the NFL?
I think everyone is going to look at what the Green Bay Packers have been able to do with Jordan Love, right? So the Packers have been so successful with quarterbacks over the last 30 years. And a lot of times they've been able to take a young quarterback and sit him on the bench for 2 or 3 years, let him work through all the things on the practice field and preseason games and those things until he's fully prepared. Even though we'll say this and everyone says, oh, he needs to sit for a year, but no one does it. JJ McCarthy needs to go to a situation where he doesn't have the pressure being able to being forced onto the field right away. Let him learn the game. Let him make sure that it's an offense that is, I would say, more balanced in terms of like being able to run the football, having the weapons around them, having a good defense and those things before he gets out there. If he's put on a team where he's asked to throw it 40 times a game, I mean, it's gonna be a disaster. He just hasn't played enough ball to be able to do it. That said, I think he's a really good quarterback. I think he has a lot of appealing qualities and attributes, and in the right situation, he could be a high-end starter.
Do you think, Bucky, that the current situation in quarterback in the NFL is conducive to this? I mean, Russell Wilson could very well be the bridge to JJ McCarthy for a team. Kirk Cousins, if he goes to Atlanta or someplace like that, even Justin Fields could go somewhere. And if a team wanted to hedge their bets with Justin Fields, McCarthy could go somewhere. Like, I do think that the current league right now, because I agree with you, I think it's so easier said than done. The Giants wanted to sit Daniel Jones behind Eli Manning, but it wasn't worth it because their team was so bad. The Jaguars wanted to sit Bortles behind Henny, but that didn't work. And so it's just like, I think it's got to be a team with playoff aspirations that is going to take him and stash him like Atlanta or like Minnesota or some team like that that's going to be the best place for him. And I think he could be very successful in a Raheem Morris, Zach Robinson, regime, or a Kevin O'Connell kind of regime.
I 100% agree with you. Not only because of the structure of those offenses, right? Those offenses are run heavy, play action dependent. They do a really good job of making the game easy for the quarterback. He would work there, but it's about having the right quarterback ahead of him, the quarterback that is not going to be threatened by JJ McCarthy coming in. The coach is strong enough in his constitution that he's not going to worry about the outside noise, asking him every week, hey, when is JJ McCarthy going to play? I mean, hey, no, like, this is our quarterback. JJ McCarthy is another guy that we're developing. In time, when he's ready, we'll put him on the field. He will absolutely need that, but a lot of times for that to happen, it takes a head coach who has like skins on the wall, where he's already established where everyone, whatever he says, he kind of has the ability to do that. That's why when you think about the Denver Broncos at 12, Sean Payton should be able to have the wherewithal to be able to like, hey, no. We're going to take our time. We're going to go with Jarrett Stidham or whoever and let him develop on the practice field until we're ready to put him on the field. We'll see if that plays out, though.
Bucky, let's talk about the wide receivers. I mean, we came into the combine. Marvin Harrison was hands down the number one guy, may still be on a lot of teams' boards, but so many guys, big, strong, and really could run. Where do you see the top of the receiver board? Is Marvin Harrison definitively number one, or does he have some competition now that maybe somebody could actually go in front of him?
I would say going into the combine, he always had competition. I think what has happened, we've talked about Marvin Harrison the last 2 years, so it's kind of been like a foregone conclusion that he would be the guy. But when you talk to people in front offices, they would tell you that Rome Odunze and Malik Neighbors are right on his heels. And depending on what you're looking for, either one of those guys could be number one. Marvin Harrison Jr. reminds me a little bit of Larry Fitzgerald in terms of how smooth his game is. Smooth route runner, great pass catcher, playmaker, a true number one receiver who has done it over time. But in Odunze, like, people are intrigued, and I think the best adjective that you can ever affix to a prospect is he's a pro. When you talk to people that interviewed him and talked to him at the combine, they said, man, he's a pro. He came in, he was detailed, he was prepared, he was articulate, he gets it. You see him work out in the drills. He looks like a 10-year vet, the way that he goes about his craft, the way he takes care of business, like no nonsense to his game. Stylistically, he's very similar to, I would say, Jamar Chase in terms of it's a rugged game that doesn't necessarily have all the polish as a route runner, but man, you get him one-on-one down the field, he wins the 50-50 balls. He is really intriguing because of all the things that he brings from an intangible standpoint and a skill set. And Malik Neighbors, when you talk to the guys at LSU, they just call him a dog. Just an intense competitor, loves the game, loves all the dirty stuff that comes with it, and he's willing to do it. He can do all the catch and run stuff that you want to see in today's game, but he also is a good route runner, great hands, and all of that. So a lot of it comes down to, what are you looking for in your number one? What are you comfortable with? I would say Marvin Harrison is probably the odds-on favorite to be the first one to come off the board. But I would tell you that there are debates in some meeting rooms about whether he is truly the number one if one of these other guys deserves to be at the top of the pecking order.
Yeah, how much do you look at speed coming out of the combine? Because there's so many guys running such amazing times, as Soren said, it's such huge stature type guys. I know Xavier Worthy had the 4.2 won the record, but you start seeing all these 4.2s and 4.39. Like, how much do you look at that as being a huge factor in how you evaluate receivers as NFL prospects?
I think it's really important to categorize receivers in terms of what you're looking for. All right, so everyone is quick to talk about the number one receiver. When you look at most number one receivers, they're not the fastest guys. I would say Tyreek Hill is an anomaly. Most number ones are about 4.5 speed guys because they really do the dirty work. They do the intermediate route running. They work over the middle. They're the guys that you count on in the clutch to do it. I would say that they have some big playability. Most of them don't. So speed to me isn't the biggest thing. I think when you're looking at a number one, can they get open? What are they like against press? Because that's the biggest adjustment from college to pro. How do they handle press? Are they an X receiver, meaning that they can line up and it doesn't matter who you put in front of them, they still can get open? Or are they a Z receiver where you need to use motion and you need the space to give them a little room to create? The number two receiver is typically the fast guy, right? So everyone is going excited about Xavier Worthy. But Xavier Worthy, to me, is the guy that plays opposite a number one. So if we think about like a traditional offense with Devontae Adams as the number one, he does all the intermediate route running, and then Xavier Worthy clears the zone for him to be able to make plays. And so you have a handful of guys that can fit that. The Flemings, Worthy can do that. A.D. Mitchell can do those things. And then you have another category in terms of slot receivers, the Ladd McConkeys, the Ricky Pearsons of the world. The wide receiver position right now is as loaded as they've ever been. And a lot of it is due to high school, where all these guys are playing 7-on-7 from the time that they're 10, 11 years old. They're running routes, they're catching passes, they're more polished than ever. And you're just seeing supply and demand. Like the supply is robust. And so you can get a really good wide receiver, second and third round, that can give you comparable production to what you're getting for number one. And I think this is going to change the landscape because as receiver salaries kind of creep over the $30 million mark, as a team, you have to kind of look at it like, is it worth it? And I think the receivers could kind of suffer a little bit of the fate that the running backs have had. Everybody's not going to be paid, and you're going to start seeing people cycle in these young guys that can get it done because it's just a younger, cheaper option with similar production.
Well, and isn't that, Bucky, the reason why receivers almost always get drafted a little bit lower than kind of the mocks go, or kind of how the fantasy football, like I think about the draft where it was Henry Ruggs, CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, Justin Jefferson, Jalen Reagor, were all kind of, well, none of them went in the top 10. And all the good ones went 18 or later. And it's, I think the hesitancy you're talking about, which is the AJ Greens, the Julio Joneses, the Jamar Chases, like they're kind of the everywhere, everything all at once receiver that can kind of win everywhere. You don't have to scheme open. And I think though, what we've seen statistically in the NFL is there's a lot of success by second round wide receivers because the NFL isn't a league now where, back when you played, it was two guys that played every down and then this little shifty guy that would come in on third down and play the slot. And now these teams, we look at Kansas City as one of the worst receiving corps in the league, but even among them, it's always you're mixing and matching. They're all package guys now. And so you wouldn't spend a top 10 pick on a package guy. Those guys have to be kind of the everything wide receivers. And I think sometimes, though, we as a community, we look at a guy like Xavier Worthy, we see the speed and the possible production, and we forget to tie that to the fact, like if the Chiefs draft Xavier Worthy, like they're not out of the woods. They got to find another guy that can take the clear out that Worthy gives him and actually get open and make plays down the field. And I feel like a lot of times those secondary receivers, they get drafted and the teams that have realistic expectations for them and put them in real roles end up reaping the benefits. And the teams that don't end up seeing failure at that position.
Yeah. So this takes me to a conversation. And I said this when Kansas City let Tyreek Hill go and Andy Reid was very comfortable kind of trading them away. It goes back to a conversation, or it goes back to a philosophy that was established in Green Bay. The better the quarterback, the lesser the need for a high-end receiver. Mike Holmgren and Ron Wolf always talked about the key to success is gold jacket caliber quarterback, great system, B pluses on the perimeter. The better the quarterback, the more he can elevate the pass catchers around him. So we can talk about how awful the Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver core are. The last time I looked, they're back-to-back champions with that raggedy receiving core. And so a lot of people should look at, let's not worry about the receiver. Let's figure out how we're going to pair the receivers to the quarterback. Because the better the quarterback, the more likely I can take a second or third round receiver and have success. Because as much as we talk about the quarterbacks developing the wideouts, the coaches, it's the quarterback that does it. Pat Mahomes being able to take those guys to the side and saying, here's what I expect from them. That's what it is. But now if I don't have a high-end quarterback, then I need better receivers. So if we think about and I'm not dissing Brock Purdy, but let's think about the Niners. So Brock Purdy is a 7th-round quarterback, but on the perimeter, you got George Kittle, you got Deebo Samuel, who's one of the best catch-and-run specialists. You have Brandon Ayuk, who can make plays. Well, now he's just tossing it out, playing point guard and allowing those guys to go to work. Much like Tua Tagovailoa is doing the same thing in Miami with a track team around him and Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill and those things. I think a lot of what we're doing is when you're evaluating is who is my quarterback and what does he need to flourish, and let me surround him with that.
Yeah, that's such a good point because you talk about the $30 million receiver versus the not. I think that the clear distinction is if the receiver is worth $30 million, he's developing your quarterback, right? Tyreek's developing Tua, AJ Brown's developing Jalen Hurts to an extent, not completely, of course. And even back in Kansas City in the early days of Mahomes, Tyreek Hill's developing Patrick Mahomes. And then once that flips, the quarterback's developing the receivers, then the receivers aren't the higher earners, to your point. And I think that's a really good distinction. I think it comes also true in the draft. Like the top 10, the wide receivers worthy of being taken in the top 10 are those kind of players. And after that, once you get into that 15 to 45 range, they can be more of those complementary pieces.
Absolutely. And I would say it even springs out differently when it comes to the younger the quarterback, the more experienced the receiver. So when you have a Josh Allen, you bring in a Stephon Diggs. And then when Josh Allen is ready to be the A-level player, then you usher Stephon Diggs out, and then you win with a bunch of young receivers, much like the Kansas City Chiefs did with Pat Mahomes. When Pat Mahomes is ready to take it over, then you put a bunch of young, cheap guys around them because now you're paying the quarterback so much money that you can't have a high-end quarterback and a blockbuster wide receiver making a ton of money as well.
With free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, every project coming with a written warning, GAN Asphalt keeps your parking lot safer, helps you and your business avoid unnecessary delays and expenses. Find them online right now at ganasphalt.com. Bucky, how many of the offensive tackles, we're hearing 7, 8, 9 might go in the first round. How many of them are left tackles, or is that less a priority today? Are teams just looking for quality tackles, period?
I think that's a thing of the past. I think the left tackle, right tackle discussion is a thing of the past because years ago when John Fox was savvy and put Michael Strahan at left defensive end so he could go against right tackles, he changed the equation when it came to defense. So right now, your right tackle better be just as efficient dealing with the rush than your left tackle. And so I think teams are more willing to play musical chairs along the offensive line to make sure that they get the best 5 on the field. That's it. This class is terrific. They're solid the first 8 or 9 guys are all first round worthy. And we saw them put on an outstanding exhibition at the combine where you can see the size, the length, the athleticism, the balance and body control to be able to do it. And so if you're talking about a polished guy like a John Alt, or you're talking about Fuanga or Felice or any of those guys, they all can get it done. And Talise Fuanga, there's just so many guys in this draft class that you can take any of these guys at the top of the board and plug and play them.
On the flip side of that, you mentioned the pass rush. It feels like every year there's fewer and fewer edge rushers that are dominant, step in the league, get it done type players. And I even think a couple of years ago when Jermaine Johnson and Karl Loftus, those guys came out, there was all this buzz about them, but there hasn't really been a huge surge at that position. Why is that? I
think it's different. I think the league is made it where one, the ball is coming out so fast. You're seeing guys are catch, rock, and throw at the quarterback position. And so it used to be when you're building a team, you wanted two guys on the edges to be able to come after the passer. Well, now you need to have someone up the gut and someone outside because the ball is coming out so fast you can't get it. That said, I would say that it's hard to find a Myles Garrett in any draft class. And having been around like a lot of like Hall of Fame pass rushers, so I had a chance to play with like Bruce Smith and Reggie White and Derek Thomas. I was in Carolina when we got Julius Peppers. Like those guys are hard to find. You just don't see guys that walk to earth like that, like those superheroes. And so you now have a league of specialists on the perimeter where you have guys that have great get-off quickness that can come around the corner and do those things. The three at the top of the board in this draft, that's what they have. Dallas Turner, Latu, and then Jerry Verse. They all have that kind of stuff. They have explosive get-off. They have great quickness. They can bend and turn the corner. And so they're intriguing tools. Now it's just a matter of putting them in a defense where they can go to work and get to the quarterback. But it's harder more than ever to sack the quarterback because the ball just comes out too fast.
Yeah, and it's even more pronounced at the college level too, where they're trying to protect quarterbacks and they don't really have the talent in the offensive line, to your point. So you're more looking at traits than production, which, defensive line, especially pass rusher, used to be one of the more solid positions because if the guy had production in college and he had the size and speed, then it was a pretty smooth transition. It's not quite as easy anymore. Not speaking of not quite as easy, linebacker has been a position, right, where we've seen kind of it go the way of the running back in that last year we didn't really have a first-round prospect going in. We did get Jack Campbell in round one, which was a surprise. Has this become kind of a situation where teams think that linebacker is just devalued because they can grab, guys like Jerome Baker, who's released today in free agency, guys that can kind of command a defense that way? What do you think the dynamic is there at linebacker in this draft particularly, but also just league-wide trends?
I think it's cyclical. I also think that sometimes decision makers get a little too cute when it comes to which positions are more valued than others. So we talk about the positions of quarterback, wide receiver, pass rusher, and then defensive playmaker, which is normally your cornerback or someone in the secondary. But when you look at the teams that are really getting it done, they have guys at the second level that can make plays. I mean, we can talk about Kansas City and their young defense, but you can't tell me that Kansas City would not be what they are without Nick Bolton making plays in the middle. They found a guy in Drew Tranquill that came in and make plays. The bigger thing is as the league kind of shifts between being a run-heavy league to one that's been pass-heavy, we've seen these lighter, smaller guys kind of play. The issue that you're having is, as we talk about the league being cyclical, the running game is coming back to prominence. And so now you put all these little guys on the field and they're running them right off the field. And so can you find the guy that's a little bit of the decathlete at the position, meaning he's big and fast enough to be able to be sturdy against the run, but he's athletic enough to cover running backs and tight ends down the seam? There aren't many guys that are available that can do that. But I would say in this class, Edgerrin Cooper is interesting because he's sideline to sideline. And the guy that probably made the biggest jump and made the most money would be Peyton Wilson from NC State. If not for his injury history, where we're talking about like a handful of season-ending injuries, this guy would be talked about as a first-round pick. He ran 4.4. He has a ton of what we call splash play production, sacks, tackle for losses, interceptions, forced fumbles. He's there. And when you see him work out the way that he worked out, I'm not saying he's Luke Kuechly, but he certainly gives you those Luke Kuechly vibes in terms of always being around the ball. Those guys may not come off the board in the first round, but I think in the second round, when we talk about good football players, those guys have to be in the conversation.
Yeah, you bring up such a good point about the way in which the league, where basically you have to defend the run with 6 players in the box now. And I feel like that is going to bring back the linebacker that's more in that 240 range because, defensive lineman, we saw Jordan Davis go high 2 drafts ago because he's able to 2-gap and he's able to change the math on the early downs in the defense. But you can't really play 6-man boxes in the NFL with 210-pound linebackers. And so it's sort of a catch-22 for a defense, as you said.
It is, because the running game, I mean, look, we've seen Kyle Shanahan make a living off of being able to get in 21 personnel, 2 backs, 1 tight end, run the football at you, and then set you up with play action. And if your linebackers are too light, they'll run for 200 yards. And if they're not athletic enough, they'll throw seam ball after seam ball right behind them off play action. So you're looking for those guys that are in that 225 to 240 range that are athletic enough to move, but they also have the hit stick ability to thump and get involved in the game, in the running game near the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, and Baltimore this year. I mean, last couple of years, 300-pound fullback. They're playing with size. They're taking advantage of what these teams are doing. The defensive backs, there's always lots of defensive backs taken. Everybody's looking for someone to cover all these great wideouts. In your 2.0, you don't have a corner going until 15. Okay, corner class, or no, just the other spots are so good. Usually we have one guy, maybe two guys that are in that top 10. We don't have that this year. Why?
Look, I think it's different. I think it's rare that you find those Sauce Gardner types, that are long and athletic and true shutdown corners. I think also the league has increasingly become a line of scrimmage league. And there are more coaches that would tell you, I'd rather invest in the front end than the back end, because if I can generate a pass rush, if I can disrupt the timing of the quarterback, I have a better chance than my guy being able to kind of cover you on the perimeter. And if we dig even deeper, going to the lower ranks, like in high school, like normally everyone is so obsessed about offense that if we go to your local high school and the 5 best athletes, the high school coach is taking the first guy, put him at quarterback. The next 3 guys are going to wide receiver. And then the 5th guy may go play DB. So what you're getting is an inferior athlete playing corner than the wide receivers. And so it's just hard to say that these guys are going to be the Deion Sanders of the world when skill-wise they are either new to the game because they were converted in college where they were a big-time wide receiver that makes the transition in college, or they just don't have the athletic tools that some of these wide receivers have had since they were in high school.
I want to take it back to offense real quick. We've kind of glossed over the running back position, which seems to be the case these days when we talk about offense. Running backs tend to be devalued. Jahmyr Gibbs and the way he played for the Detroit Lions, and I know Brad Holmes, the general manager, took a lot of flack for taking him where he took him. Could he change the game as far as making that type of running back more valuable, or is he just an anomaly? It's just running backs will always be devalued in this game moving forward.
So here's the thing, and here's the tricky thing, and it's a very nuanced discussion. I would say Jahmyr Gibbs is the kind of back that can only go in the first round, right? If you're going to take a running back in the first round, he has to be a guy that is dynamic enough to make an impact in the passing game. You cannot take the Derrick Henry type in the first round because the game is one where you're throwing the ball so much that if your running back is not involved catching 50-plus passes, you can't do it. That said, Christian McCaffrey is what you're looking for. You're looking for the guy that can control the game in a bunch of different ways. And I would say the devaluation of the running back, I think is funny, right? Because we talk about the Shanahans and we attribute a lot of the devaluation of the running back to the Shanahans, right? Because they were the first ones to say, oh, I can find one in the 5th, 6th, or 7th round. But yet I'm looking at Kyle Shanahan trade away a bunch of stuff to get Christian McCaffrey because he knows what Christian McCaffrey brings to the table. I think the conversation that we need to have is when you take a running back in the first round, right? You take a Saquon Barkley. What you're doing, if you're disciplined enough, is saying, I'm taking you in the first round so I can have you under control for 7 years. Much like the New York Giants did with Saquon Barkley. I'm not going to get emotionally attached. I have you on a cost control deal. You play for 5 years. You're still playing at a high level. I franchise you. And then after that, I let you walk. But I never give you the contract. To me, that's where the value is. If you take someone outside the first round, well, now what happens is after 4 years, they want to get paid. And do you have the discipline enough to be like, hey, man, you're playing great, but we're going to find another one to do it. And so I think a lot of it is that part of it. But when you grade the players for what they are, if they're worthy of being selected in the first round based on their talent and their production and what they can do, yeah, take them. But otherwise, yeah, you have to have that hard conversation where you can't get emotionally vested in the running back and you have to be willing to move on from them knowing that you never want to pay them significant money.
Yeah, it also just depends upon where you are in the team building cycle, where you're Detroit and you hadn't won a division in 30 years, hadn't hosted a playoff game, won a playoff game in 32 years. Positions like linebacker and running back are going to your point about the age curves, right? It's like those guys are going to be ready immediately. That draft for Detroit for Brad Holmes was about winning the division right now. And you don't really care necessarily about getting a tackle who in 3 years is going to be a starting caliber player, because by then your window might be closed. So I do think that there is more nuance to the discussion. And your point is like the Ezekiel Elliott pick, for example, was not the mistake Dallas made. It was the $90 million contract after. And that I think is the big thing there. I mean, and I think a lot of people gloss over that for sure.
Yeah, and I think you make two good points. One, the Jahmyr Gibbs pick is about elevating Jared Goff, right? So when we talk about everything is about your quarterback. What does your quarterback need to flourish? When you go back and look at Jared Goff's history, he has only been a high-end player when he's had a really good running back behind him. Todd Gurley, playing at a high level, really helped Jared Goff take his game to another level. And now we're seeing two running backs, David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, have helped Jared Goff continue to play at a high level. So a lot of it goes to the quarterback. And then you're absolutely right. Ezekiel Elliott, the mistake was paying him the second contract. Like now with the CBA, all the power is in the hands of the team. And so despite all the noise on the outside, players don't really have any leverage when it comes to holding out or withholding their services. So you don't have to do it. You just kind of have to be willing to be the villain.
Bucky, we mentioned earlier offensive tackle and wide out and how deep those two spots are. One of a couple of things usually happens in those situations. Either there's a big run and they start coming off the board fast and people are going up to get their guy. Or people are looking at it going, yeah, I want one of these wide outs, but there's only one edge I like, or there's only one guard I like, or what have you. They say, I can get another really good one if I just sit and wait. And then we start seeing them slide down the board. Is it just styles make fights? If you ran the draft back 15 times and go 15 different ways, or can you project and say they're all going to come off quick, or they're all going to kind of get pushed down because of the depth?
I would say the wide receivers will get pushed down because of the depth. I would say that if you are a team builder and you're looking, and I'm just telling you about the offensive tackle class and how there are 8 good ones, and we talked about there are 1 million wide receivers. It's harder to find an offensive tackle in the draft than it is a wide receiver. Like Puka Nacua will be the poster child for all of those things that people talk about. Like, hey, we found him in the 5th round. So I'm more likely to pass on a receiver early and say that I can find someone late to get it. The wide receivers will be the position group that suffers. I think all those offensive tackles that are talked about, they're going to go and they're going to go early. The thing that everyone has to consider is when you're looking at the draft, it's not just the 1st round. It's who can I – okay, so it's like the Price is Right, like the showcase showdown or whatever at the end of the day. What can I walk away with? Would I rather have Rome Odunze and a 2nd round offensive tackle, or do I want one of the top offensive tackles and then I can get a Ricky Pearsall or a Ladd McConkey? What is the best package? And so you're trying to look at those packages to get it. And so that's why we shouldn't look at it in a vacuum like, oh, the 1st round pick. You got to look at what the total haul can be at the end of day 2. That's how you have to decide it.
Bucky, I want to hit you with one last one before we let you go. And I don't want to call you out here, what you did last year with your mock draft, but obviously CJ Stroud has become a stud in Houston. Mm-hmm. Bryce Young is trying to figure things out with a new coaching staff in Carolina. What is Bryce Young going to be now compared to what you thought he was going to be a year ago at this time?
Well, 2 things. Here's where I beat myself up. Like, I think most of the process, not in mock draft world, but on my top 5 list, I had CJ Stroud as like the guy. And then like others, I succumbed to the noise about how great Bryce Young was and all of this other stuff. But typically when you look at it, everything that CJ Stroud had was prototypical. Size, arm talent. You looked at him at Ohio State, like that's what typically plays in the league. Bryce Young was more the outlier because he was smaller, he was thinner, and those things. I think Bryce Young can be a really good player, but I think what is alarming to everybody is how small he looks in the NFL uniform when he's lined up with pros. And I think that lesson for team builders is going to stick and it's going to resonate. And I think the guy that may suffer from that may be Jayden Daniels just because of the thin frame. If you go in the league, there's a reason why we talk about the prototypes. Part of the reason why you have all the data, why you do all the measurements and those things is you want to talk about what plays in the league and what has historically played well. If you play the odds and you go by the prototypes, it is rare that you're going to get it wrong. And I think Bryce will be fine, but I think the thing about CJ Stroud, he will always be linked to him. And I think CJ Stroud is special. He just is a special player. And we all missed on that. Like everyone has revisionist history now, but everyone missed on CJ Stroud in terms of him being what he is. And look, we got to own that. And I just think it's another reason to talk about the prototypes. So you stick to the prototypes. You may be wrong, but the odds tell you that those guys traditionally play and they play well in the league.
Well, there's a reason, like in the history of the league, when it was cold and when the rules were lax against defenses, Jim Everett looks like a tackle when you walk up to him at the Super Bowl. And even my friend Sage Rosenfels is like bigger than I played tight end. He's bigger than me. I sort of came to Jesus about this with Joe Burrow, who's one of the best quarterbacks in football, but from a frame standpoint is not a Josh Allen. He's not a Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert played a whole year with broken ribs in 2022, and he wasn't as good, but he was much better than Burrow was when he's hurt. And I think like the way that offensive linemen are with the new CBA and the way defenses kind of have an advantage at the line of scrimmage now, it's like you need a guy with prototypical size just to withstand the injuries. It's just so much harder for these smaller guys to play injured that that to me is like where I came and I was like, oh my, and you look back at Kyler Murray, whose first half of the year, second half of the year splits are really stark because first half of the year he's healthy and he's amazing. And then the second half of the year, he doesn't quite have the physicality to overcome some of the stuff. And he's a bigger, thicker guy. But he still has to deal with a lot of the shortcomings of being smaller. And I think that was something that I think the whole league media kind of had to come to grips with last year was just the sheer size advantage that a guy like Stroud has over a guy like Young.
Yeah, I think that's look a great tale. I think that's something that Nick Saban said one time. He said, there's a reason why you don't put middleweights in the ring with heavyweights. There's something about bigger, faster, stronger. There's something about size, and you have to account for it. And in the NFL, size matters. And when you look at what the Indianapolis Colts have done, if you dig into what they've done their last couple of drafts, they drafted all the prototype freak athletes. And they took Anthony Richardson at the top of the board. And I'm not an Anthony Richardson fan. I wasn't one. But if you look at what they're doing, they're banking on give me the guy with all the prototypical traits, and we're going to put it in the hands of our coaches to develop the guys with traits. I think the league is kind of leaning towards that. And we may have some outliers that kind of pop, but the confident team builders are going to say, yeah, but the odds tell us that bigger, faster, stronger wins in this league. So I'm going to take the bigger, faster, stronger guys, and I'm going to build a bigger, faster, stronger team, and we'll see what it looks like at the end of the day.
Bucky Brooks, NFL Network, NFL.com. Always appreciate the time. Great stuff. Keep up the great work. We love looking at it. We talk about it all the time, and thanks for sharing the insights with us tonight.
Yes, thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
You bet. There he goes, Bucky Brooks. Great stuff. Always. I love his mock drafts, his top fives, and all the positions, ones to look for. Check out his great work. It's at NFL.com. You can see that all there. Any final thoughts, Jeff, real quick to wrap us up?
No. I mean, I love talking to Bucky. We do a lot of this stuff when we're together in LA, and he's always insightful, always educating me on stuff. And you see why he's so respected in what he does. I mean, he's got a depth of knowledge and he knows how to articulate it.
Yeah, played the game, scouted the game. He's pretty much done it all. He's a huge resource. Eric, any final thought?
No, I thought it was great. I thought his point about running backs was also a good one, considering, where his, like kind of where there have been disagreements between his community, the draft community, and my community, the analytics one. I thought there was some common ground there, which was good. I thought the point about, how at the end where, he's one of the best to do it. And yet he's still, he's like, look, like when we all when groupthink happens, like we can oftentimes get off of our initial eval. I know, I had a tweet at this time last year. I was like, okay, this is my post-draft, quarterback rankings. And by the time I knew, fairly quick or, fairly early on that the Panthers were going to take Young, by the time you rationalize all those things, you can think differently. And sometimes we get caught in that trap of changing our opinion based upon something that wasn't our opinion in the first place.
All right, don't forget, we're proudly brought to you by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete. No commissions, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warranty. If you've got parking lot problems, they've been solving them for 30 years, celebrating 30 years as the best in the business. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com. That's GannAsphalt.com. For Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, Eric Eager from Super Sports, I'm Soren Petro saying thank you very much for joining us here on the Too Deep NFL.